What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon466cards, and today we're going to talk about the Fanatics monopoly of the hobby and why I think in some ways it's actually a good thing for the hobby and not a bad thing. Now, by and large, we are told that monopolies are bad. They're bad for the end consumer, they're bad for the economy, they're bad for society as a whole, right? And that's mostly true. There are some exceptions to that, but by and large, monopolies are bad. I think that's fair to say. On your screen is some materials I've borrowed from the Investopedia website. I'll give you some time to read through it, but basically they're saying monopolies are generally bad. There's a couple exceptions, but generally they're bad because it's large companies are exploiting their market power to basically jack up prices, right? And make a lot of money at the expense of society, the economy, and consumers, whatever you want to call it. So I don't disagree with any of this stuff. This is absolutely correct. But that doesn't necessarily apply in a specific way to Fanatics and the hobby, and I'll explain to you why. But before we do that, I'm going to apply this idea of a monopoly to wax and boxes and how it's bad for the hobby. So on your screen, it's a very simple chart. I know if you've never done economics before, it might look a little wacky and crazy, but I'm going to do my best to really explain to you in a very simple way. This is like economics 101, basically. So think about it this way. This x-axis, the line that goes across the screen horizontally, that's the quantity of goods being manufactured. On the y-axis, the one that goes up and down, that's the price of the good being produced, right? And so these two blue lines, they're what we call the supply and demand curve. So the demand curve is how much society as a whole demands this particular product or good, right? So because the vertical axis here is the price of the thing. So when the price is high, way up here in the top left, that means the quantity demanded is low, which is why the line is here. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when the price is low and it's way down here in the bottom right, that means society wants a lot of it, so they demand a lot of it, right? And so that's how, by and large, the demand curve is what we call this, goes down and to the right, goes from the top left to the right. When price is high, we don't want a lot of it, demand is low. When price is low and there's a lot of it, then the demand is high. Conversely, supply is the opposite, right? So when a supplier, production or manufacturer of a good, they like things to be priced high so that they make a lot of money, right? So when there is a high price of whatever is being sold, they produce a lot of it. When price is low, like down here in the bottom left, then they produce very little of it because they're not going to make a lot of money, right? And so where this supply curve and this demand curve meet in the middle, that's what's called the equilibrium, and that is where we settle on the quantity demanded and supplied and the price of the item, right? That is generally what a supply and demand curve looks like. Now, in the case of a monopoly, right, there is no more competition. Competition is all gone, and as a result, there's only one manufacturer left generally, right, in a monopoly. There's only one manufacturer or producer. And as a result of that, what the manufacturer or producer will do is they will decrease supply so that they can increase the price. So what that's known in economics is it's a supply curve shift. And so it shifts to the left from this dark blue line, this S line here, dark blue line, to this dotted line with this SS with the dot after it, SS prime. And so that results in this new equilibrium where it still meets the demand curve. And as a result, prices have gone up from this old place to this new place, the old equilibrium to the new equilibrium. And as a result as well, quantity has decreased from here to here, right? So price is higher and quantity has fallen. What that means in the hobby, and sorry for the economics tangent, but it is important to explain. What that means for the hobby is if you're tops or fanatics, whichever one you want to call them, that leads to fewer boxes to rip and higher priced wax because they're not competing with Panini, for example. Once they get all the licensing, they won't need to compete with them, so they're going to produce less and then jack up the price. And it's fair to say that's bad for anybody who's buying wax. That's bad for anybody who's ripping or entering into breaks because the price is going to be higher. right? This is bad. When a monopoly exists and competition is gone, manufacturers decrease supply and prices increase. This is bad. But what if I were to say when a monopoly exists and a competition is gone, manufacturers decrease supply and prices increase? This is good. It's the exact same thing, but now it's a good thing. And why is that? Why is that? Why would I think this is a good thing? Well, last time on the previous page here, we were talking about wax. What if we're not talking about wax anymore? What if we're now talking about singles? What if this chart is now about singles in the secondary market? Now we're saying there's going to be fewer singles on the secondary market, not wax, we're talking about singles now, and that leads to higher priced singles because there is a smaller supply, because there is a smaller supply of cards in the market, because there's a monopoly, because it's Topps and Fanatics owning all the licensing for all the different leagues. Higher prices on wax, fewer boxes of wax, but that also means fewer singles on the secondary market because there's no competition. And this is a good thing for the hobby because if you want your singles to hold long-term value, that's actually a good thing. So if you're like me and you don't rip wax and you're in, this doesn't apply to you, where this monopoly is bad for anybody buying wax or entering into breaks, that doesn't apply to me. But I am a consumer of singles on the secondary market, and fewer singles leads to a higher likelihood that they will hold value in the long term. So this is actually a good thing for me that it's a monopoly. And that's what I mean by a Fanatics monopoly of the hobby, of all the sports leagues licenses, baseball, basketball, football, is actually a good thing because it reduces the amount of singles on the secondary market that enables it to possibly hold more long-term value because they won't be flooded with singles from a bunch of different manufacturers. Does that make sense? Well, if I haven't convinced you yet, history is a great example of how having multiple card manufacturers competing is not a good thing for singles prices. This is taken from the Topps website. They actually have a really cool thing called Topps Rips where they have a glossary of all the terms. Really well done. And I pulled this where they talk about the junk wax era, where basically there was too many card manufacturers. They flooded the market because they were basically just trying to sell everything that they could print. Just print it to the moon and sell it all because people are willing to buy it. But that means long term, none of the singles have any value because there's so many of them. The market is completely flooded with these singles. And that's history showing that having competition, not having a monopoly, was actually bad for singles prices. It might have been good for you to buy packs and wax to rip because you're competing with each other, and so you can't jack prices up too high, but also the stuff you're ripping then also doesn't have much value, right? And if you want an example of this, look at Shaquille O'Neal, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, now a beloved member of the media as part of the Inside the NBA crew. Like, Shaq's approval rating is very, very high in terms of how he's perceived, right? Looks like a just big fun guy to hang around, right? But if you look at his pricing, he's basically, they're worth nothing, even in a PSA 10. Because in a 1992 Topps, there's a 5,000 pop. 92 Ultra, 4,000 pop. Stadium Club, 2,000. Hoops, 2,000. Skybox, 1,300, 1,400. And there's actually 19 different versions of his rookie cards in a PSA 10 that exist. And so it's a very, very large number. And there are even more at Raw and PSA 9s and all that kind of stuff, right? So Shaq is an example of what happens when you have competition among manufacturers and card manufacturers, and how it leads to overproduction. And then at the end of the day, none of the cards are actually worth much because they're just too much of everything. Now, some of you may be a basketball fan or a basketball card fan and would say, well, that's because Shaq is a big man and big men don't get hobby love, which is still a thing I do not believe. And I think I made a video about that, but I might again in the future. And to that I say, no, it's because his cards don't get any hobby love because of how many were produced. Because if you look at rare cards, they're doing just fine if it's a Shaq card. Look at these PMGs that have sold in the last few years. A PSA 4 of a green PMG, 175K. Look at all of these cards. And if you're saying, well, it's because it's a PMG, it's a special card. Well, first of all, I would say that these cards are selling for much higher than a regular PMG, like of a common basically, right? And two, I would say these are high because of the fact that high-end Shaq collectors have nothing else to collect because all they did was print a bunch of base cards that weren't special and different from each other. And so they've actually inflated demand of high-end Shaq cards by not having any high-end Shaq cards as a rookie. And that's why these are so high. It's not because it's a PMG, it's because there's literally nothing else. And so this actually proves my point, I believe, that overproduction pushes collectors away from these type of cards and has them looking for other more rare and more exclusive cards like these PMGs that are numbered to 50, that are numbered to 10 here for the green, or 100 for the other PMGs, right? Like, this to me is proof that competition among card manufacturers is actually a bad thing. And if you still don't believe me, let's talk about Victor Wembanyama. I am getting this data as of August 30th, 2024. He's played one season. It's been, I think, like 10 months since his rookie debut. He's already had 297,000 cards graded with just PSA, 179,000 gems. And that's with Panini having the NBA license and Fanatics not having the NBA license. If you break this down, I got this data from GemRate. Shout out to GemRate and Ryan at GemRate, who has obviously an amazing website. I've said this many times. I will say it all the time, and this won't be the last time you hear me say good things about GemRate. But getting back to this, I broke it down, the 297,000 total graded cards and the 180,000 total PSA 10s. Of that total, 256K is from Panini in terms of the total grades, and 151,000 are in PSA 10 from Panini. As a result, that means Topps has 38,000 Wemby graded cards and 27,000 PSA 10s. Topps obviously made a lot less product because they don't have the NBA license, and obviously if they produce a bunch of cards with the NBA license, like, they wouldn't be worth anything. Nobody would really buy it. But imagine a world where both Panini and Topps/Fanatics had the NBA license. Panini already made 256,000 of these cards, or has had 256,000 graded by PSA within a year, just by themselves. If Topps or Fanatics was also in the picture, that means the total number of graded cards would probably be double this number. It might be like 400, 500,000, because Topps would also produce to the moon and print these things to the moon until the printers scream mercy and just die from exhaustion. 500,000, 400,000, whatever that number is, it'd be in that ballpark, right? Of just graded cards. And if you're talking about PSA 10s, we're already at 178,000 PSA 10s between Panini and Topps. If Topps and Fanatics had the license, I would say it'd be somewhere between 250, 300,000, because they would also produce a bunch of NBA licensed cards. And then you're caught stuck wondering, what is the more valuable card? Is it a Topps Chrome Refractor? Is it a Prism Silver? They're basically the same thing, and that leads to market confusion, but it also just leads to prices going down, because then we get back stuck in the Shaq rookie card days where there's just too much stuff everywhere because everybody's printing everything. All the manufacturers are printing their own thing. There's no internal coordination of trying to like have a strategy of all these cards being printed and what's high end, what's low end. There's double of everything, triple of everything. If Upper Deck gets licensed as well. And that's why a monopoly is actually good for the hobby. For the secondary market, for singles, it is good because it will help reduce the supply and at least give the chance of maintaining long-term value. And ultimately, that's a good thing for the hobby, because I think we could all agree the junk wax era was not good for the hobby. And if we have card manufacturer competition instead of monopoly, that's, I believe, what would happen again. Like, look at what Panini tried to pull when they were on their way out as a monopoly. They're printing all these 1B cards to the moon. You don't think they would do that if they were trying to fight off Topps? Just sell as many as print and sell as many as we can. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Would love to hear your thoughts and comments. This might be a little bit of a controversial one. We'll see what the reaction is, but that's why a monopoly is actually good for the hobby, because of the impact on the secondary market for singles and the long-term value of singles. As we sometimes do on the channel, we preview the next video. Next time around, it is a episode or a segment of the Card Spotlight where I will focus on Scoring Kings from 1993 Fleer Ultra, where I compare basketball Scoring Kings with hockey Scoring Kings, and it is very interesting how different they are perceived. So that'll be next time. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching. I'll talk to you all soon. Cheers.